And here we go. Hello, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the second in a series of Google Hangouts where we're going to be teasing apart and looking at xAPI from all sorts of different perspectives. I'm now going to hand over to Ben, who's going to facilitate this session, and he'll shortly introduce Sean. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Craig. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and apologies that we're running a couple of minutes late. Inevitable technical issue, but we're beyond that now. Today, I'm joined by Sean Putman. I'm delighted to have Sean with us. He's been in and around the xAPI community for, well, about as long as there's been an xAPI community, and he has many talents, which I shan't go into all of them today, but one of his chief talents has been to do huge amounts of research on author tools and things like Storyline or Claro or whatever, and trying to understand their usage of xAPI and how it works for us as consumers of these tools. So, Sean, welcome. Thank you for joining us. You good to give us a couple of minutes intro in terms of your day job and then your other alter ego?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So, in my day job, I am the Vice President of Learning Development for Altair Engineering. We're an engineering software company, and really, that's sort of where I got the start with xAPI. Was looking into how we could use xAPI to really what we were looking for is a way to certify people in usage of software. So our analysis software, and when we first saw xAPI, we decided to see if we could make our software generate xAPI statements. And I'll preface that with I am not a developer. I was lucky enough to have one on my team that could work on that. So we came up with a plan, and this was back in, I want to say, February, March of 2012 or 13, which I forget which year it was, but before the spec was fully released, and we were able to do that and get some data on how our users use the software, and basically, sort of virtually certify them by coming up with analytics and things like that. So outside of that, I also work with a company called Learning Ninjas to do some consulting and do some writing, obviously, for Connections Forum with the xAPI Quarterly, and did a bunch of research on the authoring tools and sort of what are their capabilities now. What can they do straight out of the box? I'm actually working on some articles that will hopefully come out in the next quarterly on customization of Captivate and Storyline to sort of extend their capabilities. And then I also did some research of working with HTML and JavaScript libraries to be able to generate statements from there. And I guess the final thing is I'm also working on a book with Janet Efron, investigating performance, which experts just came out from that yesterday. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, sorry for the shameless plug, but we're pretty excited about that.
Well, that's cool. That's cool, and we'll be plugging you shamelessly as well, as Janet's a member of our team. So it all comes together into some sort of shameless marketing plug anyway. So thank you for the background, the introduction, Sean. That's really helpful. First of all, I want to get into just a bit of headlines about your research and what you did, because xAPI, relatively new, and yet most of the big authoring tools that people might use as they're developing e-learning courseware or simulations or whatever, it came out with a little tick box that was pretty tantalizing quite early on in their development. So without an awful lot of fanfare, all of a sudden Storyline 2's got the, hey, xAPI, tick, and various other things coming out there and saying, hey, look, I can just tick this box and then I'm done with xAPI. This is xAPI. This is going to work. So just give me the headline. What's the reality of those check boxes generally like? Can I literally build something in one of these authoring tools, hit that box, and I'm xAPI done. I'm ready to go, baby. What's the reality?
It depends on the tool. So your Captivates and Storylines, you can generate statements, and you can get statements out of them that will basically show you the things that SCORM would show you, but in an xAPI format. When we start to look at some of the other tools that are out there, so I primarily did 4 tools so far, and that was Captivate Storyline, Claro, and Lectora. And when you get to the Lectoras and the Claros, you've got a little bit more capability built within there. But in general, ticking the box it's not going to get you a lot of information. So you're going to see sort of what slides you've or screens, however they, each one has their own sort of language when it comes to what they call those, but slides or screens. You're going to see what people visited. You're going to get various levels of output from quizzes and things like that, but I think if you were to go out of the box with some of them, you're going to be a little bit disappointed. Now, what they will do is allow you to at least see how it works. So, how do I get statements out? What does a statement look like? How do I work with an LRS? Or what does an LRS do? What sort of analytics capabilities are out there that I could do with Excel or something like that with an output from an LRS? So, from a prototyping perspective, from a just let me see what I can do, yeah, you can generate some statements. You can get a sort of feel of how it works.
Okay. So, to that extent, it does kind of work. You do tick the box, you will get statements. If you've got an LRS to hook it up to, then they will all, or at least those 4, Captivate, Storyline, Lectora, Claro, will do something for you. We'll start at Captivate and Storyline for a moment, if I may. I think, from my experience here, and you're the expert though, this is one of the clearest highlights of the need to not just conform to the xAPI syntactically to put things in the right order, but to put things that make sense within the structure of an xAPI statement. So talk to me a bit about what do I actually get out by default when I'm using those sorts of tools.
So those sorts of tools, you're going to get a set of pre-described verbs. You're going to get experienced. So you experienced a slide. Depending on which one of those storyline, when you have a quiz question, you're going to get an answered. You're going to get a pass or a fail. You're going to get a completed, a launched. So there's a very small set of pre-described verbs. The big things there is you're I don't want to say stuck. That's not exactly the right word, but you're kind of stuck with what they've given you. There's no opportunity to, out of the box, there's no opportunity to really say, okay, I want this button to also give me something. There's only a certain amount of things that you can do with what they've given you.
So there's a bunch of events that are just in the system, and some of those events will churn you out an xAPI statement, the format of which is relatively set. They've already defined the verbs, and presumably they've got they've got a URI definition there of what they mean, and then they take typically the slide name as the
yes, absolutely,
or something like that.
Yeah. So that's a big thing. One of the things that we talk about a lot is sort of the best practices around that, and slide naming becomes extremely important then. Whereas in the past that might not have been a big thing if you were doing a SCORM output or something like that. Now with xAPI, if you don't name your slides, it will do, like Captivate, for example, if you don't put a slide name in, it will get actor experienced slide number 1, actor experienced slide number 2. And you'll get at that point, yes, you're generating statements, but are they worth anything?
Okay.
It's just data for data's sake at that point.
Okay, understood. And so then there's a couple that I'm not sure of their timeline. I figure they came out a little later, but maybe not. But the latest versions of Lectora and Claro, where you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of what you're doing. What are they doing differently, and are they showing us the way forward for authoring tools, or is it how do they differ?
Yeah, so Lectora and Claro definitely are what I would consider more of the way forward. So they give you the opportunity on any object within a page to generate an xAPI statement. And you can select the verb that is that is put out for that statement. Lectora gives you the opportunity to generate custom verbs as well. So those that you have, you know, from a true spec perspective, if we get into, you know, the really true meaning of the spec, what you'll miss there is the URI for the definition. It's sort of just a generic ADL. For those that are in the system already, they do go back to the ADL definition, so you do have something there. And from what I've been told, they're looking at having a more direct tie to those. So as verbs are added, you would get sort of that list would come in. Claro does some very nice things with. You can actually put activity IDs onto objects. So now if you use them throughout courses, you can specify the same activity ID within that object and use it through courses, and do some, you know, as you look at your analytics, now I can see throughout the courses how has this activity ID been used. So really the ability to customize and sort of build your statements on the fly is what those authoring tools offer you.
And so for you, that's kind of, at the moment, that's the benchmark of what others should be kind of aspiring towards?
I think so, yeah. To, you know, if I want to, let's say I've got a sort of click and reveal, you know, interaction within a course where I click a button and it reveals something. In a Captivate storyline sense, I've got to build all of that on separate slides. And what I'll get then is actor experienced the main slide, actor experienced the slide with the pop-up content, and then when I close that, I get the same experience from the initial slide. So I'm getting all of this data that's sort of, you know, a circular thing of I'm starting here, I jump out to this slide, and then I go back to here, and then I move on to the next one. Whereas if we look at the Claros and Lectoras, I can put all of that onto a slide, and I experience the slide, I click the button, and I don't experience another slide, I open something, I launch something for that. So now I'm getting more of a linear sort of view of what's taken place from the learner perspective.
And presumably that gives you, that gives you the freedom you need to work as an instructional designer, because otherwise you're having to, you're actually designing your learning to fit whatever xAPI stuff gets spat out at the other end. If you're not careful, that's clearly not the way to be going around this. You need to design as you need to design, and the data should flow freely from that.
Right, and the other thing that you have going then is as you start to think about analytics, now you've got some verbs, at least at a high level, that you can filter by when you're doing analytics. So, what sort of things did I see? Whereas if you're looking at a Captivate, a storyline, you really can't filter by verb, because every verb within the main slides is going to be experienced. So, if that's a piece of data that's important to you, you won't have that opportunity there in the back end. You would be more filtering by object or some things like that.
And one of the things that we often say that experienced is kind of the bottom rung of this sort of stuff. Experience doesn't really say a lot. If you're thinking about really getting into descriptive data about what you're doing, then experienced as a verb doesn't tell you much. Not compared to when I view a video, or I watch a video, I complete this or do that. Experienced doesn't say a lot.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And if you look at a tool, Claro actually has a really good implementation of multimedia where you can actually see a lot of that. So if you have a video within a course, you can see when people play and pause and do those sorts of interactions within that tool. And those are great things to be able to see it. Especially video is a great example of it, because if we see people pausing at the same time, we can go, oh, is there something at this point in the video that people aren't getting, or we've got something in there that they don't know the definition of, or maybe we used an acronym. But now with something like that, we could see that. Whereas if we've got a tool that's just giving us an experience of slides, I'm losing all of that granularity that I could build into that, and I'm really losing, in my opinion, the whole point of doing an xAPI implemented course. That's why we're doing all of this, is to be able to get to that granular level.
Cool. So, question coming in from Curator, which also echoes something I wanted to touch on. I thought of it first. Whoever you are from Curator, my question is thinking about how we launch these packages of content and how we identify users. Because when we were doing SCORM content packages, then as long as I had a SCORM conformant learning management system at the other end of it, I'd upload my zip package that would get unpacked, and user identity and where that data is being stored is taken care of. Now, in our xAPI world, we have flexibility, because all of a sudden this package could be stored theoretically anywhere, and I could launch it and then I could do stuff. But where I'm not in a learning management system environment or in a typical SCORM-like LMS environment, how do folks go about launching the content, and how do they go about identifying the user with the various tools that we've been talking about?
So there's a couple of ways. One of the thing that we used, and if you look at the articles and stuff that I've written, we use a tool called GrassBlade, which is a plugin for WordPress that will launch the content, and it's a single-click upload like SCORM. You have your zip file. It's got your xAPI XML files in there. It's got everything packaged up into that zip file, and it's a one-click upload. There's a few custom tools out there. I don't even want to call them tools. It's really code. So if you're comfortable with code, you could actually go out and use that. And I think Andrew Downs has a tool that was developed some time back, but it will launch those and allow you to set your endpoints and things like that. I think I'm trying to remember now if ADL might have a launcher as well. I know Saltbox had one for a time. The guys over there with the Wax LRS, they had a launcher as well. Some of the tools will allow you to customize the URL so that you can input some of that information, like an endpoint, and ask for actor information. And there's always, you can go in and customize. So most of those tools have a HTML file that launches the course, and you could always go in and customize that with your own sort of custom. Here's the actor, here's the endpoint, and sort of have that launch out that way too, or just a custom sort of HTML front end. Claro has their own sort of CMS type system that you could also launch their content from there if you wanted to. So there's a variety of ways to do that. Especially for a prototyping, we've found that GrassBlade plugin to be really, really simple, easy to use. It's quick, and for us it worked out really well for that stuff. But you could also, if your LMS will tie into an LRS, there's always the option to still upload there if it's if the ability is there to upload the xAPI enabled package.
Yeah, so I think we've seen that a few times. Another path that we've seen more from education than from corporate is using the Learning Tools Interoperability Standard, LTI. In fact, I think Wax's launcher was an LTI. I think they do an LTI launcher on their side. If you Google Wax launcher LTI, I think you'll still come across it. And Learning Tools Interoperability is a standard from IMS that allows you to pass credentials from a tool, from a tool consumer, as it's called, something that consumes the data out of it, to a tool itself, and then go through there. So we've seen that as well, and then you could have embedded the auth details for the LRS within the content itself. And that seems to have been my experiences. There are issues we've come across. I don't know, Sean, people raise issues with you in terms of the security of putting LRS credentials into client-side sort of packages of content.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things that we see a lot is the security side of it, and that is definitely a hole. which is why I think one of the launchers like the Grassblade or something like that, which gives you a little bit more security. At least you're not putting it into the client side in launching things from there. But I think a lot of the LRSs now, at least from what I've seen, are at least encoding the login information, so at least there's a little bit there. I know in the early days of stuff that wasn't the case. It was just a, here's my login credentials, and when I first started with one of the courses that we developed here that we enabled, it was it was hard coded. There was my email login and my password, and it was wide open for anybody that wanted to hack in there and get it. So I think from there at least we've got a little bit from the LRS credentials that most now are encrypted, that it lessens that a little bit, but there definitely still are security issues that we'll see.
Yeah, and I guess anytime you're passing some of that on the client side, there's always the opportunity that someone who knows their way around a browser could look at that. One of the things we've done with Learning Locker, and I know other LRSs have done the same, is we do things like what we call scoping of authentication details. So this token is only good for putting in data, it's not good for taking it out, and then you can either scope down even more to say that this token is only good for a finite period of time or for this session ID or something like that. So you can actually scope that down to be pretty damn secure. And actually, SCORM itself had a number of limitations in this area which are never solved. Right. So we're not necessarily comparing against a level playing field. Okay, so lots of ways there are lots of theoretical ways to get content from one of these packages launched. Your personal favorite, Grassblade launcher, is that free?
No, it's like $20 or $30, maybe 40, something like that. It's relatively inexpensive, and WordPress is, a basic WordPress site is free. So, to pop something like that up is pretty inexpensive if you needed to.
Pretty simple. There are code libraries out there that will do the work for you if you're happy to go and get into code. LMSs are increasingly looking at it, and that's actually there's a reasonable segue there when. And sorry, I take you off topic, but when an LMS says, "Oh, we do xAPI" or things like that, these are the sorts of questions you should be asking, right? In terms of like, well, when you say you do xAPI, does that mean you are okay to launch content, that you're tracking content, or do people seem to use that kind of interchangeably in the, oh yeah, we do xAPI, but there's a whole bunch of stuff they could do there. Right.
Yeah. So I think that is a great way to approach that. Is, okay, do you launch the content? Is it that I can upload my enabled content and you're going to be able to launch it? And I think that is. I think we'll see more LMS providers being able to launch content as we go forward, and as some of these tools start to get better, and especially as we look at more granular stuff, as people start to see the capabilities and what they can do with the data that's generated by xAPI enabled courses, that honestly, in my opinion, they're not going to have a choice but to say, okay, we need to be able to support this.
So where do you see it sitting on that scale of, if you got a choice, okay, so you're going to create some content in a popular authoring package, let's call it Clara or Lector for the sake of calling out better ones from the xAPI's point of view. You could put it out in a SCORM 1.2 package. Presumably you might be able to do it 2004 if you were really fancy, and you could do it xAPI. Are there any, am I looking at this the right way? Should I be looking at it in this like straight up SCORM replacement thing, or am I missing the point, or how do you feel about that sort of decision?
At that point, I personally, I wouldn't look at it as a SCORM replacement, because to me it's apples and oranges. SCORM gave us completions, it gave us the test scores, it was a way that we could sort of bookmark. This gives me more opportunity to work with the data coming out of my other enterprise systems to really see if what we're doing is making an effect on the end product, the business bottom line. And and that's sort of one part of it. The other side is, one of the things that I've been really heavy into is the use of xAPI to alter design. So how are people using the modules and the courses that we're creating? Are they using it in the way that I thought they would? Or am I seeing certain buttons being clicked or certain things being interacted with that are being used in a different way, or a different path being taken through a set of modules? And xAPI gives me the opportunity to get to that more granular data to see the path that people are taking through things. Whereas, you know, with SCORM, I might see slide names and I might see a completion or a test taken, or, you know, through the LMS I'm seeing, okay, they went from module 1 to module 2, but what did they do in between, and what did they do sort of as they were going through that? And also, if it was things outside the LMS, I have no idea if something was done outside the LMS, whereas xAPI gives me the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a whole different approach.
Yeah, that's a nice way of looking at it. You have this kind of, you've got the inside the learning sort of ecosystem routine, and thinking about the design implications, what more you can do, how else you can assess, what else you can grow a little bit from, and how you can refine your design. But then you've got this big picture stuff of being able to directly relate that sort of usage of that style of training and performance, which is, you know, people can't do that at the moment. So trying to negotiate the gap between what L&D does and what L&D says it can prove it can do.
Right.
Part of that's going to be about having this data that's interoperable, that can be put out there and things like that. So right now we're collecting it, putting it in this little silo, but if you ever need to benchmark it against a wider set of data, a blended learning path or something like that, you're not going to get there. Just coming up with another question here. Is the use of xAPI from an authoring tool the best way of showing people what's possible, or is there a better way? Should we be showing data that comes from the 70 or the 20 in the 70-20-10 sort of framework, or is this the most relatable way to do something, or should we focus on the things we can't track already as opposed to the things that people believe they can?
I think, you know, there is a big portion of that is the things that we can't track today. You know, people learn a lot from that. I know that's, you know, over the last several years, that's a huge discussion point throughout the L&D community of, you know, we're always learning, we're always, you know, how do we track that informal learning? And you know, not all learning is done in the LMS. So you know, I think, honestly, I think it's both, and not to try and walk the line too much or be too gray, but you know, there's a lot of things out there that I don't think, if you talk to some L&D professionals, and especially folks outside of L&D, that we don't think about as learning objects, blog posts, podcasts, things like that people are doing, you know, even outside of their work environment, that are helping them be better at their jobs. But that's really tough to relate. So, to talk to a non-L&D person and say, okay, well, we've got this course, and look at all these things that we can now track out of it. That's kind of I guess a jumping off point to then say, and oh, by the way, we can also use it to do all of this other stuff. So these, you know, the companies that have the Yammer communities and things like that, look, there's potential that we could go out and track what people are doing there, and things that are being shared, and how do those things that are being shared play into someone sort of leveling up their skill set. And, you know, those are the things that in the past I don't even think we thought about.
Yeah.
You know, as a way to show that people use these to sort of level up.
I think that's a great point. So on that bombshell, I'm going to open up to anybody in the room. Thank you for joining us here on the Hangout Live, guys. If anyone in the room has any questions for Sean, or just wants to put it to the group around these author tools, then feel free to unmute yourself and yell it out to us. Otherwise, I'll take another question from Curator if not from here. So anyone in the room?
Hello, this is Alex. Hi, guys.
Hey, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I'm always, you know, the techie and the geeky side of me is always excited about this stuff. because we're talking about being able to catch data in different places and analyze behavior. The main thing that I'm interested in, though, being an L&D, which is the space that I work on, and I'm a learning developer as well, is it seems to propose a drastic paradigm shift in the L&D organization itself. So how do you see, Sean, what is the required changes that must happen to be highly functional using xAPI from an L&D perspective? In other words, I feel the way I look at it, I'll give you a little starting point here. I feel that you need a little more techie involved people, that you need some resources in that area to really reap the benefits out of this API, because the current state is probably not going to be sufficient.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I think there's a little bit of a skill set change right now, and I think what we have to remember as we talk about this right now is that as a group, looking into xAPI, we are on the cutting edge of this still. We're on the front of this wave very much so. Even though, I with Ben and Janet and others, we've been talking about this for 3+ years-ish. We're still on the very front edge of this. So at this point in time, yeah, I think if you're going to really enable an xAPI based system, there's some skill sets in there. Do you have to be a coder? No, I think I've well proven that with some of the HTML-based stuff that I've been doing. I am not a great HTML developer. I can hack stuff together, and Janet knows from doing presentations with me that I very much call myself a hacker, and not a hacker in the sense that I'm going to steal your personal data, but I can sort of shove things together and kind of make them work. And there's a little bit of that skill set, sort of the maker thought process that needs to go into that. The other side of that I see from an L&D perspective is not even so much the techie, but it's a different way to think about and approach the way that you design your interventions. So thinking about data as early in that as possible, looking at your designs in a different way, at least a little bit different way to try and think about. And some of it is, okay, I don't want to design specifically for data, but I at least want to have the data in mind that I need to see as I'm building that initial design. And that's definitely a different skill set, a different mindset. And again, Janet and I talk about it a lot, is you don't have to be a data scientist, but have at least a basic understanding of what it is that you can do and what it is that maybe you'd like to do.
Thank you. Actually, I'll have a quick follow-up, because you mentioned that design piece of it. And as I do everything in L&D, I mean, everything is driven by the business needs. So whatever the role or the specific job is required to do is what I design for, so that person is able to perform to the standard that we're expecting. Could you see a benefit of using xAPI in that framework, in that way that we can, I mean, because right now I hear things like, well, we're able to tell somebody when and read a blog. Okay, well, that's great, but the blog wasn't part of my initial design. So how does that align, per se, if you think of it?
And I think those are the great things, because those are ways that we can look at learning paths. So the learning path isn't necessarily in the LMS, and it's not just the course. One of the things that I talk with people about a lot is sort of the novice to expert path. How did I get here? And what we want to be able to do is track how people get from that novice to expert, and everybody might be a little bit different. But if I see that blog post helped 6 people, the next person that comes that has sort of that same job role and that same path to this point, I can then say, oh, you might want to go check this out. This helped other people within your role, within your job role, your job description, or just your background in the way that you got here. So looking at the learning paths and being able to sort of semantically as we collect more data, it's a machine learning principle. We collect more data, we see how that was used, and then we sort of build that up into this semantic layer of, okay, these people with the same stuff, same background, same job role did this. We think you might want to do that too.
Right, thank you guys. That was awesome. Anybody else in the room?
Yeah, if it's all right, I'd like to carry on with that. I love that idea of the fact that you've almost got a mentoring by cohort learning. That's an awesome opportunity. So you don't have to really think too much about what you're putting in place, because you know that if it's not efficient, if it's not effective, then the cohort will have found their own solutions. Is that something you're seeing is starting to emerge within discussions in the xAPI camps, that there is a need for, we can't just deal with huge boxes of content, and Curator is a classic example of 99% curated content? Actually, the social learning and the ability to learn from the social learning that goes on, is that a growth area you see for xAPI at the moment?
Absolutely, because that is the stuff that extends beyond the LMS. So as we talk about looking at courses, and that's just one piece of that puzzle, and seeing how other people got from point A to point B, I think is, to me, that's sort of the holy grail of the L&D community of, okay, how can I take this person from A to B and make that sort of repeatable, and give them at least suggestions to get them to the end point that they want to get to. And that's sort of for me, what I see is that path isn't always going to be that linear. So we can give them the suggestions. To me, it's the Amazon model of, okay, Amazon's going to give me suggestions based on past purchases. I don't have to follow that. I can jump over to something else. But at least we're giving them opportunities. We're not just saying, okay, here's a course and have fun, and we'll see you at the end when you complete your 5-question quiz, and we hope you pass it. If you didn't, we're going to make you take it again. But it's okay, now we're really going to give you the opportunity to sort of extend out beyond that, and we can, as L&D, we can get meaningful data from that. So I absolutely think that's a growth area.
Thanks, Jim. I think I'd hijack on the back of that. I've always had this little thing about L&D professionals, and what we've always been about for a time has always been trying to get to that perfect piece of content, that perfect journey. We see people spend hours, days, months, years even crafting a learning journey for somebody else to take that's perfect, and we agonize over the tone, the quality, the words that we put into scripts and things like that. Absolutely agonize over that. And I wonder sometimes whether actually that's ever going to be the real point that we get to, especially if we're in this world of moving really fast, of never-ending change and things like that. So our focus on perfection, on creating the perfect piece of content for an individual, seems kind of counter to the pressure that we're under to do more with a lot less, a lot faster. But if we're being a bit more savvy about, look, here's a world of curated content that we believe to be of a certain standard, that we believe this stuff to be generally true, to be of a reasonable level of quality, and here's some paths that other people take, and mapping those to things like personas, people who are above you, below you, sideways from you, different to you. I know some of the things that we're looking to do in Curator. One of the things that we have at the moment is we get a lot of comments, but shortly we'll turn on some features, not for this MOOC unfortunately, but for future ones where we're trying to be particularly provocative. So can I give you a comment from someone you agree with generally, someone that you hate, someone you disagree? I want to show you what they say each time, just to poke you, just to poke the bear a little bit. How can we start giving some of that stuff, those counter things, to say there isn't just one perfect journey for you to have?
Yeah, no, I mean, it really goes to, at that point, you're talking about content delivered at runtime in the way that or semantically based on what the person has done. So it's not just a prescribed, okay, here's 20 screens and this is going to give you everything you want to know, but it's, you came from here and we're going to maybe tweak these screens a little bit based on some semantic content. Again, it goes into the machine learning principles and being able to adjust what people need based on where they've come from and sort of the background that they have.
Cool. So I did a little rant. If you're in the Hangout, there's a link to where I go off on one, as I often do here in the rant. I'll make it available there. But we've got some more questions from Curator. So I'm going to do a couple of rapid-fire questions from Curator and then one slightly longer one, if that's okay. Question from James comes in. Do any of the authoring tools create content that gets xAPI statements, or they're all just sending stuff? At the moment, I believe they're all just sending stuff. Nothing has the power to actually react based on xAPI. From an authoring tool standpoint, is that true in your experience?
For the most part, yes. There's some hacks that you can do with Storyline that could pull something back in, but it's not. I mean, again, you're hacking it with some sort of JavaScript or things like that. So out of the box, yeah, I think that's a fair statement.
I think that's an interesting area to have picked up on, James, because that's actually where we start to get much more exciting with these things, is how do I start customizing? Can I customize some of my, can I customize my package in Storyline based on if somebody has or hasn't already done this and I see that in the LRS? That's potential, but it needs some thought, needs some mapping, because you're going to need to know the activity IDs that should have been completed that would make that left or right turn in advance and things like that. So there's a bit of planning there, but with those hacks maybe, and maybe with future versions, maybe that's something we'll see. So, thank you, James. Next question, Glenn. Beyond authoring tools, Sean, in your introduction, you mentioned using xAPI for capturing performance and skills associated with a software application. Man, Glenn, it's like you know Sean, and it's like this is a hit me out of the park sort of. I don't know what you call it in baseball, something where somebody just tosses it up and you're just ready to whack it. But Glenn's question is, for example, have you ever used xAPI to track mouse clicks in a software application?
Well, yes, we have. Yeah, that was a custom application. Yeah, that was set up on a T for me right there. That's what that's called, Ben. You put it on a T.
Put it on.
So that's exactly what we were doing. Is we built a little script that would plug into our software and actually track the mouse clicks that were happening within the software. So when we opened a certain piece of it, it would generate a interacted with statement. When they clicked a certain button, it would generate a created statement. And we found it really effective. In fact, a little sideline quickly is we had a change in the software that the developers swore was better than the old way to do something, and we actually found out it was 200 more mouse clicks to set up an analysis using this new way over the old way. So from a UX perspective, it was kind of nice to be able to say, look, we have data that proves that this sucks and needs to be changed.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you for the question, Glenn, and Sean, thank you for knocking it out of the park. Last one from Curator for a moment. Will Ober, he's using Instructure Canvas as his LMS, and he's wondering about the best way to track student actions from that. Instructure Canvas doesn't have xAPI tracking inherent in it, so he says it seems like the most expedient way forward is to build objects with xAPI, embed these in a Canvas wiki page, pass the data through the API and into the LRS. Does this sound about right? I've got some thoughts on that, Sean, but if you've got anything on it, then go for it.
I'm not familiar with the platform, but it sounds like that would be probably the closest way right out of the box to do it, is to use their built-in API to sort of hack the statements using that.
Yeah, so there's a few things. One is Canvas has quite a lot of support for LTI, so you might look for authoring tools that are also capable of using LTI. And that way you can pass straight from, you can launch content out of Canvas using LTI. That will launch the content, make the session viewable for that user, and then either the xAPI endpoint can be embedded within the content, or you could have passed it in some of the variables for the LTI launch. I think Canvas is next on the list for a series of LMSs that we're working with a few partners to xAPI-ify, if that's a phrase. So the first one we did was Moodle, and there is a plugin there called xAPI Logstore xAPI actually. That takes every activity log in Moodle and outputs it to xAPI. And so if you are launching content within Moodle, then that is logged to the activity stream in Moodle. Now we can get that, put it in xAPI. Blackboard have just done the same thing. There is a Blackboard building block for that, and Canvas is next on the list. So Will, to your question, yes, I think you can do it in the way you describe. Also investigate LTI, also nag in structure. I know they're doing work. I've spoken to their head of product a few times, and I know that they are doing work to enable xAPI as an inherent core feature of their LMS. But when they say that, they mean extracting from the LMS, not necessarily launching within Canvas. I don't think that's on their radar, but I might be wrong. Okay, so we're coming up towards the top of the hour. I'm going to ask Sean. Sean, you got anything else on your chest that you wanted to get out whilst we're here? And then I'm going to come back to the room and see what's left in here.
No, I think that's the biggest thing. If I had, I guess one thing is that if I had advice to anybody that wants or is interested, obviously if they're here on the MOOC, they're interested, is to just go out and hack stuff together and prototype it and make some statements, see how it works, and just sort of get the mechanics of it down.
Cool. And to go to the $1 million question, potentially quite literally, I guess the top of your headline about which tool you should or shouldn't use was kind of, well, look, if you've got a tool already and you're looking to prototype, then you can probably do it. Storyline, Captivate, if it's got a checkbox there, you can probably do something with the tools that you already have in order to just prove a point, prove a process. But if you actually want to look at production use cases, you are looking at Lector or Claro.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, and I think you can see that those guys have been pretty involved with the spec from the beginning, it shows with the implementations that you see. So yeah, you can certainly do it, and with a little JavaScript, if you have a little bit of capability, you can extend the other tools. And there's some code out there. As I said, hopefully the Q2 version of the quarterly will be coming out soon, I would imagine, and I'm hoping to get a couple articles in there based on customizing a bit.
Where should we be looking for this research? So we should be looking at xAPI Quarterly?
Yep, that's where they'll primarily be.
That's where they'll primarily be. We should also be looking out for yours and Janet's book.
Yes.
What's that called?
Investigating Performance.
And in which good bookshops can you get that?
Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and BookBaby. and the other place that you'll be able to see a lot of this coming up later this summer is learnxapi.com. And we're going to be putting a lot more content out there, especially related to the tools and using the tools to generate xAPI.
Cool. So for those of you watching this video as part of the Learn xAPI MOOC, the kind of follow-up to the MOOC, when the MOOC is over, you can continue the learning at www.learnxapi.com, of which Sean is one of the curators there. And so that's a website with a bunch of great resources that's going to be growing over the summer. We're kind of hopeful, Sean, that between us and some of the other folks, and maybe some of the folks in the Hangout and watching online, we can keep publishing and talking about these sorts of experiences, because this is why I wanted to get Sean along today, because he's kind of like he just did the work. There was kind of like, who are we waiting for to go and do this stuff? So it's brilliant that you did the work, and it's fantastic that you continue to do the work, and now we want to invite others to join us in talking about their experiences using xAPI and what it does do well and what it doesn't do well, and what the tools do and all the rest of it. We're not trying to be biased here. I think that's fair. We're just pleased that people are doing xAPI stuff, but there are some truths that some are better than others.
Right. Yep.
Right, guys. I'm going to hand back to Craig to close it out. If anybody's in the room and wishes to hang on for a further question after the recording, then please do stay with us for a moment. I think Sean might have to go at the top of the hour. So thank you, Sean, for taking the time, and thank you everybody else for joining us in the room and on Curator. Thank you for your questions. We'll continue to take questions in Curator. We've got more of Sean's content in the MOOC this week, but for now I'm going to hand you back to Craig.
Thank you, Ben, and of course a huge thank you to yourself, Sean, and everybody else that's joined in, whether you're able to stay for the full hour or not. Just to reiterate what Ben said, if you're not already a part of the Curator course, feel free to enroll on that, and I want to say play catch up, but actually there's no real need to. A couple of people have concerned that they've joined late. There's no stress over timings and things like that. If you've got any questions, hashtag #LearnXAPI, drop them into Twitter. I imagine Sean and Ben will spot them before I do and hopefully start to get back to you. So please feel free to carry on this conversation. I'm going to press the stop broadcast button now. Please feel free to be on your way. But if, as you leave, if you wouldn't mind dropping Sean a big thank you into the chat pod, I'm sure he'd appreciate it. I know I'm very thankful to you, Sean, so thanks for freeing that time up.